My name is Renata Voss. I am 36 years old. And on a Tuesday afternoon in November, I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of the hospital where I work, eating a granola bar for lunch because I had missed my actual break, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the dog camera in my kitchen. I almost didn't open it. I had 3 patients waiting. I had a chart that needed updating. The camera had been installed 2 days earlier, and I was still getting used to the notifications, still calibrating the sensitivity settings because the system flagged Felix moving between his water bowl and his bed, and that was not the kind of motion I needed documented. I tapped the alert anyway. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I was already looking for something without having named it yet. The live feed loaded, and there, in my own kitchen, in the house I had designed the layout of, standing next to the island I had spent 6 weeks selecting the countertop for, were my husband and a woman I had never seen before in my life. What they did not know, as they stood in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon while I was supposed to be at work, was that the new camera I had installed 2 days earlier was not the basic model that my husband had seen me order. It was the upgraded version, the one I had switched to at 11:18 on a Thursday night because the reviews said it had better night resolution, and I wanted to actually see my greyhound moving through a dark kitchen rather than watch a gray shadow on a grainy feed. The upgraded model also had full audio, clear, directional, crisp full audio, and it was recording every word. He laughed. He actually laughed. And then I heard him say, "She's completely clueless. She wouldn't notice a marching band in the driveway." She laughed with him. I sat in the parking garage and I listened to my husband describe the texture of my obliviousness to a woman who was standing in my kitchen, and I did not cry. I did not call him. I did not drive home. I finished the granola bar, put the car in drive, and went back inside to see my patients. Because I had a plan to build, and plans require a clear head. Before I tell you what happened 5 weeks later, when my husband walked into a meeting he thought he had organized and found out who had actually organized it, I want to know where you are right now. Drop your city, your country, your local time in the comments below. I have listeners on every continent and I picture every one of you. And if this story is already sitting somewhere specific in your chest, if you know the feeling of being in a room where you're being dismissed by someone who should know better, please subscribe and like this video. This channel was built for that feeling, and for every woman who decided to do something deliberate with it. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because the parking garage was not the start. The start was years before that, in the particular way that betrayals always begin long before the moment you actually see them. His name was Owen Voss. I kept his last name when we married, which in retrospect I think about more than I should. Owen was 40 years old, a commercial litigation attorney who worked at a mid-sized firm in Nashville called Hartfield & Crane. He was precise and argumentative in the way that litigators are, the kind of man who treated every conversation like a deposition and won most of them because he had prepared more thoroughly than the other person. He had sandy brown hair going gray at the temples in a way he considered distinguished, and that I had genuinely agreed with until I didn't anymore. He drove a charcoal gray sedan that he kept spotlessly clean and parked in the same spot in the garage every single day because he said consistency was a form of discipline. I was a hospitalist physician at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I managed inpatient care, which meant I was the doctor patients saw not for a single procedure or a specialized condition, but for the complete arc of their hospital stay, from admission to discharge, across whatever set of problems brought them through the door. It required the ability to hold many variables simultaneously, to build a working model of a person's physiology quickly and update it constantly, and to notice the thing that was slightly off before it became the thing that was very wrong. A number that was at the edge of normal rather than comfortably in it. A response that was technically adequate, but with a quality that made you look twice. A pattern that was explainable by one cause, but that, if you watched it long enough, resolved better under a different interpretation. I had been doing this for 9 years. I was good at it in the specific way that people are good at things that match the shape of how their brain already worked. What I want you to understand, and what becomes directly relevant later, is that my professional life had trained me over nearly a decade to notice discrepancies, small ones, the kind that most people log as probably nothing and file away and move past. I had learned, in the specific grammar of hospital medicine, that probably nothing is where almost everything that matters begins. Owen and I had met 11 years ago at a dinner party hosted by a mutual colleague, a woman named Dr. Parveen Shah, who threw exactly one party per year in a house that was always immaculate and at which the food was always extraordinary, and at which nobody ever seemed to know everyone else in the room, which was, I eventually understood, the entire architectural point. Owen had been representing a pharmaceutical company in a liability case at the time, and I had been doing my residency, and neither of us had planned to meet anyone that evening. He was the most direct person I had ever spoken to at a social gathering. He had none of the ambient performing that most people do at parties, the laughter calibrated for the room, the opinions adjusted for the audience. He asked me what I actually thought about 3 consecutive subjects in the first 10 minutes of our conversation, and listened to all 3 answers completely, which is genuinely rarer than it sounds, and which, at 25, I found irresistible. We exchanged numbers at the end of the evening. He texted the following morning at 8:15, which I noted because it was neither the overeager same-night text nor the calculated 3-day silence. It was a Tuesday morning text from a person who had decided something and acted on it, and at 25 that read to me as confidence. We dated for 2 years with the specific quality that I think of now as the best version of Owen, which was real and not performed. He was curious about my work in a way that felt genuine, rather than supportive. The difference between someone who is interested and someone who is being good about being interested. He came to my residency presentations. He read articles I recommended. He argued with me about diagnostic methodology at dinner in a way that was actually stimulating, which is not something most people can say about their dinner conversations. We were, in those years, genuinely compatible. I want to be honest about that because I think the truth of it matters for understanding the rest. This was not a marriage I walked into with my eyes closed. This was a marriage I chose with full information about the person I was choosing, and the person changed in ways I did not initially have enough data to detect. We married in a ceremony we planned ourselves at a venue outside Franklin, Tennessee on a Saturday in April. 68 guests. A dinner reception with a playlist we built together over 3 weekends of Sunday mornings, him in the kitchen making coffee, me on the couch with the laptop, debating every third song. My best friend from medical school, Dr. Teresa Okafor, who was now running an internal medicine practice in Atlanta, gave a toast that made the room laugh and then made the room cry in that order, which is the only sequence that actually works. She ended it by looking directly at me and saying, "Renata notices everything. Owen, just so you know exactly who you're marrying." The room laughed. Owen laughed. I laughed. None of us knew how specifically true that statement was going to become. The marriage was, for most of its years, a real one. I want to be precise about this because I think it matters. I am not telling you a story about a woman who should have known from the beginning. I am telling you a story about a woman who built something real and then watched it become something else at a pace slow enough that each individual change had a plausible explanation until you looked at the accumulation and understood that the accumulation itself was the explanation. Owen had a specific kind of stubbornness that he dressed as principled consistency, which meant that changing his position on anything felt to him like a moral failure rather than a natural response to new information. I had learned over a decade to present new information through the frame of his own previous conclusions wherever possible. This is an exhausting communication strategy, but an effective one for a man who could not metabolize being wrong. We had built a life with real things in it. A house I loved, in a neighborhood with good trees and neighbors we actually liked. A dog named Felix, a brindle greyhound we had adopted from a racing rescue organization 3 years into the marriage, who took up most of the couch and required an amount of emotional attentiveness that I found, privately, both hilarious and moving. We had friends. We had vacations that were genuinely good. We had Sunday mornings that were worth having. I want to tell you exactly how the discrepancies started appearing, because I think this is the part that people who have not been through this kind of thing most consistently underestimate. It was not one large obvious sign. It was never one large obvious sign. It was a series of small ones, each individually explainable, each solvable with a reasonable alternative interpretation, arriving over the course of about 14 months at a frequency that eventually outpaced the capacity of reasonable alternative interpretation to contain them. It started in September of the year before the parking garage, when Owen began leaving for work earlier in the morning. Not dramatically earlier, 15 minutes, then 20, then on some days close to 30. I noticed it the way I notice most things, registered it as a data point, and held it without action. Litigators have irregular schedules. Cases generate unpredictable early demands. I knew this about his work, and I used it as the first available alternative interpretation, which it was. Then his phone began living face down on every surface it was set on, which was not a behavior I had observed in 11 years of knowing him, and which registered in the specific part of my brain that spent its working hours cataloging behavioral baselines and deviations from them. I noted it. I held it. In October, he attended a firm social event on a Friday evening that he had mentioned 5 days in advance, reminded me of twice, and texted me from at 9:45 to say he would be another hour, which was more narrative maintenance than he had ever given to any prior firm event in the decade of our marriage. I noted the over-narration. I held that too. In October, he mentioned a colleague named Sasha in the context of a case they were preparing together. In November, he mentioned her in a context that had nothing to do with any case. It was a casual mention about a restaurant she had recommended near the courthouse, and the casual quality of it was the thing I noticed. The texture of someone who has become comfortable enough with a reference to let it land without packaging, the way you mention a person whose name has acquired household permission through repetition. I filed it. I did not act. I had a folder building in the back of my mind, and I knew it, and I continued to hold it because the folder was full of observations, not evidence, and I was not willing to act on observations alone. I had married a litigator. I understood the difference between a folder of observations and something you could actually use. By January, the folder had been building for 4 months, and I had added to it without taking anything out. Not evidence, a pattern. The distinction, at that point, still mattered. In late October of the following year, Felix began having episodes of nighttime anxiety. The vet recommended environmental monitoring to identify whether there was a pattern to the triggers. Specific times, sounds, movement in the house. I ordered a camera system for the kitchen, which was where Felix slept, on a bed we had placed next to the radiator because he had strong opinions about temperature. I initially selected a mid-range model. Then I read the product reviews more carefully and saw that the upgraded model, which was $42 more, had significantly better low-light resolution and, critically, clear full duplex audio that the base model lacked. I switched to the upgraded model at the last minute on a Thursday evening. It arrived Saturday. Owen helped me mount it on the cabinet above the refrigerator on Sunday afternoon. He chose the angle. He thought it was a camera for the dog. I was not thinking about anything other than Felix when I installed that camera. I want to be precise about this. I was not suspicious in an operational way. I had a folder in the back of my mind, but that folder had been sitting there for over a year without generating a specific action. The camera was for the dog. What happened 2 days later was not something I had planned or anticipated or arranged. It was information that arrived because the audio existed, and the audio existed because I had spent $42 extra on a Saturday evening because I wanted better night resolution for my greyhound. The motion alert came at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was in the parking garage. I had 23 minutes until my next NOTS patient. I tapped the live feed. The kitchen was lit by the afternoon light coming through the window above the sink, the window I had argued for during the renovation, because I wanted to see the backyard while I did dishes. Owen was standing at the island. He was in his work clothes, jacket still on, which meant he had come directly from somewhere, or was about to leave for somewhere. Standing beside him, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, was a woman I had never seen. She was perhaps 32 or 33, dark-haired, in a blazer and dark pants that suggested she had also come from somewhere professional. I watched. I did not breathe. Owen said something I couldn't fully catch, low and laughing. Then he said, clearly, because he had shifted slightly toward the camera without knowing it, "She works every Tuesday. She won't be home until 8 at the earliest. We have the whole afternoon." The woman, and I would learn later that her name was Sasha Merrill, that she had been at Hartfield and Crane for 3 years, that she was 31, that she had transferred from a firm in Memphis. She said, "I always feel like she's going to walk in." And Owen laughed again, the specific laugh of a man who considers himself more clever than his circumstances, and he said, "She's completely clueless. She wouldn't notice a marching band in the driveway." I sat in the parking garage for 2 full minutes after that, completely still. The granola bar was still in my hand, and I finished it. Not because I was hungry, but because something in my brain required a mechanical action to continue processing what I had just heard. He had just described me to another person in my own kitchen as someone too oblivious to notice what was directly in front of her, not someone to be feared, not someone to be careful around. Clueless, that was the word, clueless. I want to tell you that the thing I felt in that moment was anger or devastation or the specific acute grief of a marriage ending in real time. Those things were in there somewhere, but the dominant feeling, if I am being completely accurate, was something colder and more useful. It was clarity. 11 years of a relationship, 11 years of building something I had believed was real, and the clearest thing I had ever heard from him was those 7 words into a live audio feed while he stood in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. She's completely clueless. 7 words, clear as a vital sign. I want to tell you that the thing I felt in the parking garage was anger or devastation, or the specific acute grief of a marriage ending in real time. Those things were in there somewhere. But the dominant feeling, if I am being completely accurate, was something colder and more useful. It was clarity. 11 years of a relationship, 11 years of building something I had believed was real, and the clearest information I had ever received from him was those 7 words delivered into a live audio feed while he stood in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. She's completely clueless. 7 words. Clean as a vital sign, the kind of reading you don't need to run twice. I put my phone in my pocket. I went back inside the hospital. I saw my 3 remaining patients. I was completely present for all of them, which I want to say specifically because I think it would be easy to imagine that I was distracted or diminished or somewhere else in my head. I was not. I have spent 9 years learning to hold what I know in one compartment and function in another, and whatever I had lost in the parking garage, I had not lost that. I updated every chart. I spoke to 2 families. I made one recommendation that I was confident about and one that I flagged for a second opinion in the morning, the way I always did when something needed a second look. At 7:15, I gathered my coat and my bag, and I walked to the parking lot. I called Teresa from the car. Teresa Okafor does not process information in small portions, which is one of the reasons I have kept her close for 14 years. I told her what I had heard. She asked before I had finished the second sentence, "Is it recorded?" I said yes. The camera saves a rolling 72-hour archive to the cloud, she said, in the specific tone she uses when she has calculated something and arrived at a conclusion. Then you have already won. Now you just need to decide how and when. I said I needed a few weeks to understand what I was working with before I moved. She said, "Take every day you need. Call me every single day." She meant it. I drove home. I walked through the front door at 7:53. Felix met me in the hallway the way he always did, pressing his enormous narrow head into my stomach, his standard greeting for any absence longer than 4 hours. I put my hand on his back and stood there for a moment in the hallway, with the door still open behind me, the November cold coming in, and felt the specific weight of knowing something that changes the floor plan of a life. Then I closed the door. Owen was on the couch with his laptop, the blue light of it on his face, and he looked up when I came in and said, "Long day?" I said yes. He said, "There's pasta in the fridge." He went back to his laptop. I went to the kitchen and gave Felix his dinner and stood at the window above the sink, my window, the one I had argued for, and looked at the backyard in the dark and thought with great care and precision about everything I was going to do. I need to explain something about building a plan when you are also living inside the life. The plan requires you to maintain undisturbed. It is not glamorous. It does not feel the way it looks in a story. It feels like going home every evening and making dinner alongside a person you watched betray you, and asking about their day in a register that sounds like interest, and laughing at the right moments, and not letting any of the clarity in your chest travel the 12 inches to your face. It requires a specific kind of compartmentalization that I had, as it turned out, spent 9 years developing as a hospitalist physician, and which I was now deploying in a context its architects had not anticipated. On Wednesday morning, the day after the parking garage, I called an attorney named Claire Ashworth at 8:15 from my car, engine running, before my shift. Teresa had mentioned her name 6 months earlier in a completely different context, a conversation about a colleague updating an estate plan, and I had filed the name the way I filed most things, in a place I could retrieve without looking for it. Claire was 47, a family law specialist who had been practicing in Nashville for 18 years. She had, according to Teresa, a particular quality of being able to hold complicated emotional situations entirely at arm's length while she worked the legal mechanics, which is not a common combination and is exactly what I needed. I told her I had an audio recording made in my own home of my husband with another woman. She asked whether Tennessee single-party consent law applied. It did. She said, "I need you to tell me everything you know about your marital finances right now. Not later. Now." We were on the phone for 45 minutes that morning. In that 45 minutes, I learned things that I had been too trusting to learn in 11 years of marriage. Things I had not looked for because looking for them would have meant holding a suspicion I was not yet ready to hold. Our joint checking account held $83,000. Owen had a separate brokerage account that he had mentioned in passing 2 years earlier, once, and which I had not investigated because I had given him the same trust I would have wanted for my own accounts. The house was jointly titled. My hospital retirement account had a balance I knew well. Owen's firm pension was something I had a general number for but no recent documentation. Claire said, before she let me go, "Before you do anything that changes the surface of your daily life, I need you to do one thing today. Open a personal bank account at an institution where you have no joint accounts. Today. Not this week. Today." I opened it on my lunch break at a credit union 3 miles from the hospital, a basic checking account into which I deposited nothing. I simply made it exist. The following week I moved carefully, with no outward change to anything Owen could observe. I photographed the entire cloud archive of the kitchen camera recording, the audio time-stamped, clear, and already backed up to 2 separate cloud services and forwarded to Claire's secure intake email. I photographed 24 months of joint financial statements, page by page, and I went into Owen's home office, into the filing cabinet that he had never once locked in the 4 years we had owned the house, and I found what I had not known to look for. The unlocked cabinet. I have thought about that detail many times. The filing cabinet with the lock built into the top drawer that Owen had never engaged in 4 years of living in that house. He had a lock. He had chosen never to use it. Because she's completely clueless. Because why lock something against a person who is never going to look? I found 3 annual brokerage statements for an account I had not known existed beyond a single passing mention 2 years ago. The current balance on the most recent statement was $214,000. The deposit history showed a pattern of regular transfers from an account with a designation I did not recognize. I photographed every page. I replaced every page. I recreated the exact position of the folders and closed the cabinet. Then I went downstairs and made dinner and set 2 plates on the island with the white quartz countertop. And we ate, and I asked about a case he was working on, and he told me. And I listened, and I went upstairs at 10 and sat in the bathroom with the door closed, and added the account number I had photographed to the notes file I had been keeping in a password-protected app on my phone that he had never seen me use. I called Claire from my car the following morning. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for 4 seconds, which from Claire was a notable duration. Then she said, "Renata, I need you to hear this carefully. What you have just described may be significantly larger than an affair. If that brokerage account holds funds that were diverted from the marital estate, and if those transfers represent an effort to shelter assets in anticipation of a divorce proceeding he was already preparing for, then we are not looking at a straightforward dissolution. We may be looking at deliberate financial misconduct inside the marriage." I looked at the windshield. She said, "Do not change anything on the surface. I am bringing in a forensic accountant." Paula Reese arrived at Claire's office on a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks after the parking garage. She was in her mid-50s, precise and entirely unreadable, carrying a laptop and a legal pad, and she had the specific expression of a person who has spent enough years inside other people's financial arrangements that the capacity for surprise left her a long time ago. She asked me 67 questions. I know it was 67 because I counted them while I answered them, a habit from patient interviews. She had the documents within 24 hours and said she needed 10 days. She called Claire at the 9-day mark. Paula's report arrived in Claire's secure portal on a Wednesday morning at 6:52. I read it in my car in the hospital parking garage, the same level, and I have thought about that geography often. The transfers to the brokerage account originated from a Delaware-registered limited liability company called OVL Consulting. OVL Consulting had no website, no listed employees, no public presence of any kind. Its registered agent was a commercial service used by hundreds of anonymous entities. Over 18 months, OVL had received payments from 4 distinct sources, the largest being a series of recurring monthly transfers from an account associated with a commercial real estate developer in Memphis. Paula's analysis noted, with the clinical precision of someone who chose her words for their legal value, that the structure of the LLC and the pattern of transfers into the personal brokerage account was, and I am quoting her exact language because it matters, consistent with fee diversion, meaning the practice of directing client-originated payments to a personal entity rather than through proper professional channels. Owen Voss, commercial litigation attorney at a Nashville firm, had been quietly and methodically moving money into a structure he believed his wife would never find. He had been right for 18 months. Then Felix developed nighttime anxiety and I spent $42 more than I planned to on a camera upgrade. Now, if you are still with me right now, and I hope you are, I want you to do one thing. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are in the world, and what time it is where you are sitting. And if this story is landing somewhere specific in your chest, if you have ever been in a room where someone described you as easy to deceive, as someone whose trust they could spend without consequence, tell me about it. I read every single comment on this channel, and I mean that without exception. Hit subscribe if you have not already, because what comes next is the 5 weeks I built in complete silence, and the Monday morning that ended everything, and the evening Owen drove home from Knoxville to a house where the situation had already been resolved without him. Claire filed the petition for dissolution on a Monday morning, the day I had selected with deliberate care, because Owen had a firm retreat in Knoxville from Sunday evening through Tuesday, and would therefore receive the service notification by email while he was in a hotel room 3 hours away and not in a position to come home and perform a reaction at me. I had thought carefully about that choreography for several days. I did not want a scene. I had seen enough of Owen's professional style to know that confronted in his own house without preparation, he would be maximally tactical, which would be tiring and unproductive, and would give him an opportunity to shape the initial narrative in person. I wanted him to receive the news alone, without an audience in a hotel room, with nothing to perform to. Scenes are instruments for people who need the other person to react. I did not need Owen to react. I needed Owen to be served. I also, at 9:02 on that same Monday morning, sent an email to the 3 named managing partners at Hartfield & Crane. Claire had drafted it. I had reviewed every word. It contained 3 attachments: the kitchen camera audio recording, dated and time-stamped, featuring Owen Voss and Sasha Merrill in the marital residence, Paula Reese's forensic accounting summary regarding OVL Consulting and its relationship to the Owen Voss brokerage account, and a copy of the filed dissolution petition noting the inclusion of undisclosed marital assets as a central claim. I sent the email and then I went to the hospital and saw my patients. I saw 6 patients that morning. I know because I counted them, not at the time but later, when I was thinking about what kind of person shows up for 6 patients on the morning she has sent the email that unravels her marriage. The kind of person who knows that the patients did not cause the email and will not benefit from absorbing its weight. By 11:47, Owen had called my cell phone 4 times. Each call went to voicemail. By 2 in the afternoon, there were 8 text messages. I read all of them from my car at the lunch break I actually took that day. Sitting in the parking garage, the same level, the same corner. The tone of the messages moved through stages with the speed of a man who had spent his adult life arguing for a living and had just discovered that the other side had been building their case while he was building his. The first 2 were confusion. Renata, I got something from a law firm. Is everything okay? The next 3 were indignation. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We need to talk before any of this goes further. The final 3 were something more genuine. The alarm of a man who has run out of professional composure. At 3:15, he called Teresa. Teresa let it go to voicemail and texted me immediately. He called me, didn't answer. Are you all right? I wrote back, I am better than I have been in 14 months. She sent back a single word that I will not forget. Good. He drove home from Knoxville that evening, arriving at 9:43. I know it was 9:43 because I heard the garage door and looked at the clock on the nightstand. A habit from years of tracking intake times. I was on the couch with Felix when Owen came through the hallway door. He was still in the clothes he had worn that morning, no jacket now, and he had the specific look of a man who had spent 4 hours in a car constructing a version of himself that was going to walk through this door and manage the situation with precision and intelligence. He walked into the living room and found me on the couch with a cup of tea and a greyhound, and the expression of a woman who had already finished the work he was still preparing to begin. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "Renata." I said, "Hello, Owen." He set his bag down on the chair rather than dropping it, a piece of controlled behavior that I noted. He said, "We need to talk about all of this. Claire Ashworth is my attorney. Her contact information is in the packet you received this morning. You'll want to call your own before anything else." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Felix, who had not shifted position from my side. Then he said quietly, the way people say things when they have been reduced to the actual question, "The dog camera." I said, "The dog camera." He said, "You upgraded it." I said, "I upgraded it." "A beat. For the audio." I said, "For the night resolution." The audio was included. He looked at the camera mounted above the refrigerator, visible from the living room doorway. Then he looked at me. "How long have you known?" I said, "About you and Sasha from Tuesday. About OVL Consulting from last Wednesday." He said in a voice with something stripped out of it, "That's 3 weeks." I said, "Yes." He said, "And you didn't say anything." I said, "No." He said, "How did you find the filing cabinet?" I said, "You didn't lock it, Owen. You had a lock. You never used it." He was quiet. I said, "You told her I wouldn't notice a marching band in the driveway. You were describing me as though my trust was the same thing as my blindness. It isn't. I trust people I have reason to trust. When I have reason not to, I look." I stood up. Felix stood up beside me. I said, "I think you should call your attorney in the morning." I went upstairs. That was the last conversation we had in that house. The legal proceedings took 7 months. I will not walk you through all of it, because 7 months of family law proceedings generates an enormous amount of texture that is not interesting to anyone outside of it, and the people inside it are too exhausted to find it interesting either. What I will tell you is the shape of it. Claire's petition included the audio recording and Paula's forensic accounting findings. As Exhibits A and B, Owen retained an attorney named Marcus Bright, whom Claire described as thorough and fair-minded, and appropriately aware that the OVL documentation was a significant exposure. The bar complaint was the weight in the room that nobody named directly, but that everyone's legal language moved carefully around. What was negotiated over 7 months of motions and counter-motions, and 2 mediation sessions and 1 day of depositions that I found, professionally speaking, far less alarming than Owen had anticipated, was a settlement. The marital estate was divided to include the full $214,000 from the brokerage account, which the court found had been funded substantially with income that qualified as marital property under Tennessee's law. Owen made a voluntary disclosure to the state bar regarding the referral fee arrangement, which was required under the settlement terms and which was, according to Claire, significantly preferable for all parties to the alternative. Claire called it a significant outcome. I sat in her office on a Thursday afternoon after the final signature and looked at the settlement summary and thought about $42. Owen moved to a short-term furnished rental in Brentwood in January. I stayed in the house through the spring, not out of attachment, but because the real estate market timing was genuinely better in April, and I had learned, in 11 years with a litigator, to make decisions based on the actual data rather than the emotional schedule. The house sold in April for $11,000 over asking. I had known it would. I had paid attention to the neighborhood comps for 3 years. I moved into an apartment in East Nashville with floor-to-ceiling windows on the south side that caught the afternoon light in a way that reminded me of nothing from my previous life, and therefore felt entirely clean. There was a second bedroom that I converted into an office with a standing desk and a plant I was determined not to kill. The building allowed large dogs. Felix adapted to apartment life with the philosophical flexibility of a creature who had always understood that the quality of the couch mattered more than its address, and who had, in any case, already identified the best sun patch in the new living room within 48 hours of arrival. Teresa came to stay for a long weekend in April, 4 months after the petition, 2 weeks after the house sale closed. We sat on my new couch with a bottle of wine that Teresa had brought from Atlanta, and Felix arranged himself across both our laps in the configuration he always chose for guests he approved of, which was head on Teresa's side and feet on mine. We stayed there for 2 hours without moving, because neither of us was willing to disturb him, which is the thing about greyhounds that nobody tells you. They make you stay. We talked about everything that had happened. not with the urgency of people who had not processed it yet, but with the quality of people doing an inventory after a storm, checking what was left and what was not. Teresa said, at some point in the second hour, "The thing I keep coming back to is the $42. I said I knew. She said, "If you had gotten the basic model." I looked at the ceiling and thought about that. If I had gotten the basic model, I would have had a dog with captured nighttime anxiety and no audio, and a folder in the back of my mind that had been growing for 14 months without a resolution. I would have continued to function in a marriage that I had been increasingly unable to explain to myself. I would have been, as Owen believed, clueless, not because I was inattentive, but because the specific piece of information that transforms a folder of observations into something you can use had not arrived. It arrived because of Felix. It arrived because of $42. It arrived because I take my dog's anxiety seriously, and I wanted clear audio, and I switched the order at 11:18 on a Thursday night. Teresa said, "So Felix saved you." I looked at him, still draped across our laps, asleep now, one large paw hanging off the edge of the couch. I said, "Felix and $42 and the 9 years I spent learning that the thing that is slightly off is always worth a second look." She raised her glass. "To the second look." I raised mine. "To the second look." I want to say something to you now about the word clueless, because I have thought about it a great deal since that Tuesday afternoon in November, and I have arrived at a place with it that feels like the most honest thing I have to offer from everything that happened. Owen used it to mean that I was not paying attention, that I was trusting in a way that was functionally indistinguishable from obliviousness, that he occupied a version of our shared life that I could not perceive clearly enough to constitute a threat to him. He was wrong on all 3 counts, but I also think he was describing something real, just not the thing he believed he was describing. The woman he talked about in my kitchen, the one who wouldn't notice a marching band in the driveway, that woman was real. She was the woman who had decided, years ago, to give the person she married the same quality of trust she would have wanted for herself, and to direct her careful, professional, precisely calibrated noticing outward toward her patients and her work and her friendships, because you cannot live inside a marriage and simultaneously conduct an investigation of it. You have to choose. I had chosen trust. That was not a failure of intelligence. It was a choice I made with full information about the kind of person I was and the kind of marriage I was trying to build. And when trust produced audio evidence of its own violation, clear and time-stamped and saved to 2 cloud services, I redirected the noticing with everything I had. I redirected it toward the filing cabinet that had never been locked, toward the brokerage statements, toward the Delaware LLC, toward Claire Ashworth's 45-minute phone call at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. I was the same person I had always been. I was just using the same skill in a different room. That is not cluelessness. That is the decision you make when you believe someone. And the moment the evidence tells you the belief was wrong, you update it completely, with the same precision you brought to the original belief, and you do not apologize for how thoroughly or how quickly you move. If someone in your life has used your trust against you, has confused your peace for your blindness, has looked at your quiet, and seen an absence of intelligence rather than a considered choice about where to aim it, I want you to hear this. The noticing was always there. You had simply decided to use it for better things, and when you needed it, you found it exactly where you left it. Tell me something in the comments. Has someone ever underestimated you so completely that when the truth finally came into the room, the silence that followed was the loudest thing you had ever been in? Tell me what that felt like. I read every single comment. I mean that. I will see you in the next story. Before you go, I want to take a genuine moment to thank you for staying with this story all the way through. You gave it your full attention, and that is not nothing. Renata's story, and every story on this channel, is built on the belief that the women who were called clueless, invisible, manageable, or too trusting deserve to have their intelligence documented as precisely and carefully as they actually lived it. If this story reached somewhere real for you today, if something in it recognized something in your own life, please share it with one person who needs to hear it. Just one. And subscribe right now if you have not already, because we release a new story every single day, each one about a woman who was told to stay small and quietly built something the people telling her that couldn't walk back from. Each one told with the care, the specificity, and the absolute refusal to minimize that these women brought to every room they were ever in. The quietest comebacks are built in silence. We are here for every single one. Thank you for being part of this community. I will see you tomorrow.